Hey guys, Dr. Mark here. One of the most popular words in nutrition and health is inflammation. It seems like just about everyone is interested in reducing inflammation and eating in a way that's anti-inflammatory. But many of the people that are pushing this agenda are the same charlatans that are looking to make a quick buck. So today I want to do a deep dive into what the science actually says about nutrition and inflammation. And today I've brought on a special guest, Dan Feldman, who's a registered dietitian, also known as the Powerlifter Dietitian Online. Dan, thank you for coming on the channel. The first thing I got to ask, because I know so many people want to know, are there any specific foods you can eat to reduce inflammation? Like, give us the list.
So people ask me all the time for foods that fight inflammation. I also see often influencers list different good and bad foods that are supposedly anti-inflammatory and pro-inflammatory. See this online a lot. However, unless you have an allergy or intolerance, which at least with food allergies is characterized by an acute inflammatory response because your body thinks the food is a pathogen. So unless you have an allergy or intolerance, it's your overall dietary and lifestyle pattern that matters for minimizing that chronic inflammation, rather than including or excluding any one food. Because this type of inflammation is more low grade and chronic, it's really the sum of your overall diet and lifestyle that's most important.
Okay, so it seems like reducing inflammation has a lot more to do with overall patterns than specific foods. Here's what I want to know. How do you know if your inflammation is worth reducing in the first place?
So because chronic inflammation can manifest in a lot of different ways, and because the symptoms of chronic inflammation, such as painful joints, development of metabolic diseases, it can be caused by a lot of different things. In my opinion, it's tough for a lot of people to know whether their inflammation is worth reducing or if chronic inflammation is at the root cause of their health concerns. Certainly if you have a disease characterized by inflammation, so that's any disease or condition ending in itis, such as arthritis, following the principles of an anti-inflammatory diet is a good idea. I would go farther to say that just about everyone should follow the components of an anti-inflammatory diet, because again, an anti-inflammatory diet is kind of a general healthy diet. And, maybe some people have chronic inflammation, but they don't know it because the symptoms aren't manifesting. So having an anti-inflammatory diet be helpful there. Or maybe someone doesn't have chronic inflammation and they want to keep it that way. So again, following an anti-inflammatory diet, eating a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, whole grains, healthy fats, limiting saturated fats, sweets, fried foods. Very basic, but I would recommend that most people just do that, irrespective of whether they think they have chronic inflammation or not.
Okay, so I'm getting the sense that based on what you said so far, there's different types of inflammation. Is it all bad? Like, what is good?
There are a couple different types of inflammation, and inflammation is not inherently bad. So inflammation can be sort of thought of as akin to an alarm in our body in response to some sort of injury or to fight off pathogens to promote repair and healing. So acute short-term inflammation is essential for us to survive. So for example, say you scrape your knee, blood flow increases to the area of skin that's been damaged to promote healing, and your skin becomes inflamed. It's more red, more swollen, painful, etc., and it heals. Another example is the inflammatory response to exercise. So, when we lift weights, we're damaging and breaking down our muscle tissue, and the post-exercise inflammatory response is critical for ensuring the muscle heals to ultimately become stronger. So acute inflammatory responses are short-term, generally lasting days to weeks. Again, it's very important. Another example of inflammation, good kind of inflammation, will be when we're sick. We have that short-term inflammatory response. We just feel really crappy, really stuffy. And it's that what we're experiencing is that inflammatory response that is fighting off the pathogen, so we ultimately heal. Now, when people talk about reducing inflammation, they're generally referring to chronic inflammation, which is slower, less intense, and more long-term. This chronic low-grade inflammation doesn't usually just resolve, and it can contribute to various conditions, cancer, autoimmune diseases, heart disease, arthritis, all this stuff. And it can also result from conditions such as obesity. So that's the bad inflammation, the low-grade chronic inflammation that people generally want to reduce.
One thing I've heard you mention in the past is that a boring, healthful diet is the most anti-inflammatory diet. What does that mean? What does it include? And is there anything that it avoids?
So this brings us to the anti-inflammatory diet. Now, there's no formal definition for an anti-inflammatory diet, but an anti-inflammatory diet generally emphasizes eating whole foods such as fruits, vegetables, healthy fats. So healthy fats are going to be largely our plant-based sources of fats, as well as fats from fish, omega-3s, and lean meats, limiting ultra-processed foods and simple sugars. So yeah, that does kind of sound like a pretty boring general healthful diet. That's going to really be your anti-inflammatory diet. A Mediterranean diet is an example of an anti-inflammatory diet, which was created in 2009. So it's a tool to assign dietary patterns an inflammatory score to determine the extent to which a diet pattern can reduce or increase chronic inflammation. So when developing this tool, this dietary inflammatory index, researchers looked at various components of a diet and which ones were associated with higher or lower levels of 6 inflammatory markers. You don't need to remember this, but those 6 inflammatory markers are interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-4, interleukin-6, interleukin-10, TNF-alpha and C-reactive protein. Again, I wouldn't worry too much about those individual markers, but I just figured I'd mention it in case people were curious. Now, as for the specific components of the dietary inflammatory index, so again, there's 45 components of this dietary inflammatory index. I'm not going to go through them all because it'll bore you to tears. Some notable examples are monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, which are both associated with lower inflammation. And that includes omega-6 fats, which anti-seed oil people point to as supposedly causing inflammation, but again, these omega-6 fats, as with, other polyunsaturated fats, are associated with lower inflammation in this dietary inflammatory index. Saturated fat is positively associated with inflammation, so that's why lean meats rather than fattier meats are a component of an anti-inflammatory diet, since animal products are your biggest sources of saturated fat. Various vitamins and minerals are associated with lower inflammation and are part of this dietary inflammatory and anti-inflammatory index, so vitamin B6, beta-carotene, folic acid, magnesium, niacin, riboflavin, selenium, thiamine, vitamins A, C, D, E, and E, and zinc, all part of this dietary inflammatory index and are associated with lower levels of inflammation. And other things like garlic, ginger, onions, saffron, turmeric, green or black tea, flavonols, anthocyanins, isoflavones. So isoflavones are found in soy, pepper, thyme, rosemary are all part of that dietary inflammatory index and are associated with lower inflammation. Now, the dietary inflammatory index isn't perfect. It doesn't always align perfectly with, inflammatory markers, but in observational studies, it does tend to correlate with at least some inflammatory markers. So it's a decent way to kind of analyze a diet to determine the extent to which a diet pattern is inflammatory.
That's such great insight, Dan. Thank you for sharing that. One thing I know about this channel and hopefully this video is that a lot of the people watching it are already coaches, nutrition coaches, trainers, or they're in the fitness space. If you had to give some advice to nutrition coaches that are working with others and working with clients that want to reduce inflammation, would there be any pointers that you would give them?
So personally, I would recommend that nutrition coaches know their particular client very well, and specifically whether the client they're working with is the type of client who's super interested in the deep science of their nutrition, or whether their client just wants to know what they need to know for their goals. Personally, the majority of my clients likely fall in that latter category. So folks who are inundated with an overabundance of nutrition information online and just want to know what they need. For those clients, you can let them know the best way to use diet to reduce inflammation is to eat a variety of fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, and so specifically, foods that contain healthy fats would be plant-based fats, so avocado, olive oil, omega-3s that are found in fatty fish like salmon, nuts, nut butters, etc., whole grains, and then limiting ultra-processed foods, animal fats, so limiting fatty meats, butter, full-fat cheese, limiting sweets, and limiting fried food. And really, for these clients, you'd want to emphasize eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. I know it sounds basic, but that's, really what most people need to know when it comes to diet and reducing inflammation. Now, if your client is the type who wants to really learn the nitty-gritty about inflammation, I would recommend that you read the paper, Designing and Developing a Literature-Derived Population-Based Dietary Inflammatory Index. That's PubMed ID 23941862. It goes through the various components of the development of the dietary inflammatory index, and the components and what went into it. And I'd recommend sharing that as well with your clients who are super eager to learn. It's open access because that paper describes the various dietary components that go into determining whether the extent to which someone's diet is pro and anti-inflammatory. So you could read that paper, and send it to if you have clients who are really, really interested, or just summarize it for them. So you could do that as well. But for the majority of clients, just that basic, like eating a lot of fruits, vegetables, plant-based fats, whole grains, limiting processed foods, limiting fried foods, stuff like that is going to be most important. I'd also recommend that coaches tell their clients to be wary of fear-mongering in the fitness industry associated with inflammation. So, inflammation can be influenced by so many factors and can present with such a wide range of symptoms. A lot of people looking to sell diet plans, supplements, diet books, like to use the term inflammation as a fear-mongering term. So again, letting your clients know that, and that it ultimately comes down to the basics when it comes to really making sure that our diet is anti-inflammatory.
That is so great, Dan. Thanks for coming on the channel and sharing what you know about inflammation and what the science says. If anyone is interested in learning more from Dan, go check him out on Instagram at this handle right here. Make sure to give him a follow, and I know he sends out frequent educational emails, so make sure to get on his list as well. Now, if you're really serious about starting a nutrition coaching business, the next thing I'm going to have you do is check out this video I've linked up right here. Today we talked all about nutrition and inflammation. Another really popular topic is gut health. You're going to learn all about what the science says and what to eat to improve your gut health in this video right here. Check it out now. I'll see you in the next one.